Hello and welcome to Verra's webinar on updates to VCS REDD methodologies. We'll just wait 1 or 2 minutes for a few more people to join and then get started. As you have any questions during this webinar, please type your questions into the chat box. And just a note as well that this recording will be shared within 24 hours with all registrants as well as posted on our YouTube channel. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Leila Rosen, Senior Program Officer with the Forest Carbon Innovations team. And just as a reminder, if you just joined, please type any questions in the chat box and we'll share the recording within 24 hours to everyone that has registered for this webinar, as well as post the recording on our YouTube channel. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Naomi Swickard to start our webinar.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So we have put out a number of updates in the last week or two. So we want to go over with those with you today. So in terms of an agenda, we will cover the updates that have been made to VMD55, which is the module for unplanned deforestation within the new VM48 REDD methodology. We will give an update also in that context on the jurisdictional deforestation data sets, and in particular, the allocation data and the readiness of that allocation data for projects. We will also talk about JNR, which we put out updates to as well. Go over a few other upcoming changes and additions and give you all a chance to ask any questions that you might have. So to give a quick intro, we really want to just be able to provide a bit more context on the updates that have come out, as well as updates on other bits and pieces of the REDD program. And to put those changes in context, essentially, as we've been moving through the process with ICVCM, there are a number of areas where there were minor adjustments needed on both VMD55 and the JNR Framework to align with the CCPs, the core carbon principles. So these updates reflect our edits to both of those in order to ensure, or hopefully to ensure alignment with the ICVCM CCPs. The other main thing that we have done is to correct a few minor issues. So there was some areas where there was conflict between documents, for example, and as well the release of the VT7 tool, the allocation tool itself, required incorporating some of the updates made when that came out after the VM48 methodology framework into the original methodology. So we've corrected those items. Within the context of VMD55, we will give you an update on the allocation data as well as on the fee structure around that. So we actually put that out a few weeks ago, but wanted to take this opportunity and just mention that piece as well. And we'll go over the changes to the JNR framework, which are similar in terms of ICVCM alignment and other minor issues that have been identified over the years. And then we'll talk about next steps and other issues and changes that are forthcoming within the program. So with that, I am going to hand over to Salvador to give an overview of these updates, and then we'll have time at the end for questions. Again, please don't hesitate to drop any questions that you have into the Q&A box as we go along. Over to you, Salvador.
Thank you, Naomi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend this session. So please let me quickly describe the changes that we made to module VMD55. The more important changes that we are making are in order to fill some gaps and inconsistencies that still remain in the module, as Naomi was describing. But some of those changes or inconsistencies we have already identified, but some others were noticed during the ICVCM assessment and the findings emerging from that assessment. And so we will notice that, and we are taking action on that. So the changes that we are making to module VMD55 include first some provisions to allow sustainable forest management activities as part of the project scenario. And also, we are making all references in VMD55 to the risk mapping and allocation tool, VT7, fully consistent with what the VT7 tool actually says. And we, of course, are making some other minor changes and edits, typos, a few mistakes in some equations and so on that we identified in the process. All these changes were put together in what would be version 1.1 of VMD55. The draft version 1.1 was put out for public consultation a couple of weeks ago. And we invite you all to review the proposed new version and forward any comments or questions that you might have so that we can address them and produce the final version as soon as possible. Next question, next slide, please. So, first, version 1.1 of module VMD55 now includes a set of provision meant to allow select forest management activities to be carried out as part of the project interventions. The main reason for this is that under the right circumstances, the revenue from, or even the mere on-the-ground presence associated with timber harvesting or wood collection can indeed legitimately support the project's sustainability and permanence, which is something that we really care about. And in fact, the VCS portfolio does already include some projects that aim at avoiding unplanned deforestation and do include some forest management activities or timber harvesting activities as part of the project's interventions. So for those reasons, we made changes first in the applicability conditions, section 4, which now allow for timber harvesting through selective logging, but not clear-cut harvesting, and also allow the collection of fuel wood or extraction of wood for charcoal or fiber production. Now, in order for this provision to not have unintended negative consequences, we are including a number of restrictions or safeguards. On the one hand, these activities, these timber harvesting or wood collecting activities, cannot be carried out in pristine primary forests, but they can be carried out only in forests that demonstrably have already experienced historically some level of degradation. Secondly, these activities should be carried out as part of a sustainable forest management plan that has been duly certified either by the relevant government authority or by a well-recognized international organization or something. We have included a couple of other similar safeguards. Naturally, the emissions coming from tree harvesting activities have to be monitored and taken into estimated and deducted from the emission reductions that are achieved or can be achieved by the project. So to do this, we have added a whole new section, section 5.3.3.5, which includes a number of equations for estimating the emissions caused by these activities. And then afterwards, these emissions have to be deducted from the emission reductions achieved by the project. Next slide, please. Yeah, we are also making several changes in VMD55 in order to ensure that all the references that the document makes to the risk mapping and allocation tool and procedure are fully consistent with what the VT7 tool actually says. The thing is that VMD55 was released at the time when VT7 was still being finalized and tested. And thus, the text and references in VMD55 do not exactly correspond to what the final version of VT7 says. For instance, the procedure described in VT7, the procedure prescribed in the final version of VT7 does not yield risk classes, but directly yields predicted deforestation values per pixel. Also, as the procedures described in VT7, now in the final version of VT7, operate completely within a GIS environment, then the allocation procedure is significantly simpler now than what is described in VMD55. So basically, we made a number of changes to section 5.3.2.2 and quite a lot of changes to the text of Appendix 3. However, we want to emphasize again that the risk mapping and allocation process are carried out by Verra either directly or through our service providers, and not by project proponents. So really, project proponents do not need to worry about most of these changes. The only part that is relevant for them is how baseline emissions are calculated, which are these calculations are now significantly simpler than they were described in version 1.0 of VMD55. Next slide, please. So, and that leads us to another important update that we just made. Basically, it's the time frame for the release and allocation of activity data to projects. We have updated the time frame for the release of this data. Basically, the jurisdictional activity data for a first set of jurisdictions were completed a few months ago, and for the jurisdictional activity data for the remaining jurisdictions are being currently produced. But something that has not been properly noticed is that prior to these data being used for allocating baselines to projects, these have to be first subjected to a rigorous quality assessment process. And then, once their quality has been assured, they have to be used for producing the deforestation risks maps. And only until then is when they will be ready, these data will be ready for allocating baselines to projects. We are currently engaging in these two later stages, the quality assurance, quality control of the jurisdictional data, and in the production of deforestation risk maps for them to be ready for allocating baselines to projects. That's why we have to update the release dates or the release time frame. And as you can see, we published this a couple of weeks ago or so for those jurisdictions included in what we call the first round, the ones that are listed here in this table, starting with the first set of jurisdictions will be hopefully will be ready in October for allocating to projects, and then we have designed a staggered scheme for releasing the data for other jurisdictions in order, again, to make sure that the quality and any issues or technical issues that might come or we might find in these data sets are properly addressed prior to allocating them to baseline. This is the most crucial part of this new methodology. So therefore, we have updated the time frame for releasing those. This is for those jurisdictions that were included in the first round, and the remainder jurisdictions, all the other jurisdictions, what we call the phase round 2 jurisdictions, have already. The time frame for releasing the data for the other jurisdictions, the round 2 jurisdictions, is going to be published later today in our website. So if you are interested or working on some other jurisdictions, please be attentive to what we publish in our website. Next slide, please. And this, of course, comes together with the costs of using these data. So we have last week, I think it was, we published the fee structure for project activity data allocation procedures. And first, and it's published already in our website, but there are a couple of things that we need to consider and we want you to bear in mind. First of all, these fees are mandatory for all projects that are going to use VMD55 in order for them to be allocated jurisdictional activity data for constructing their project's baselines. Now, we are really not, or the project proponents will not be paying really only for activity data. What we are considering in what we consider in developing this fee structure is first the high quality of these data that we are requiring from our data service providers, and these data are also produced at the jurisdictional level and are consistent with national approaches. Second, and it's not only producing activity data, but this process includes the data collection itself, and then, as I mentioned before, the activity data that are produced are then subjected to a technical review by a third-party experts once the quality of those data has been ensured, then these data are used for producing deforestation risk maps, and finally for the allocation procedure. And all of that also includes quite a heavy load of administration charges. That's why all these things is what we are taking into account in the design of this fee structure. Nevertheless, we expect that these fees will be lower than the cost that would be in the project proponent would have incurred in developing the baseline under the traditional approach, in which each project had to collect all the data from zero, from the satellite imagery all the way down to the baseline. So in addition to that, we will be, for planning purposes or for feasibility studies or for due diligence purposes, we will be publishing low resolution forest cover benchmark maps and risk maps that will be made available at no cost, but only for those purposes. And also another consideration that we are making is, in order for these data to be as closely aligned with national data and national initiatives on REDD, we will be providing the full data set for each jurisdiction to governments upon request for their own use at no cost. The next slide, please. So in summary, this is the fee structure that we have developed. It's already published in the details. I will just mention briefly here that it's basically the cost will be, the fee will be charged to each project and will have to be paid by project proponents. It's a very simple flat fee structure. There is first an initial payment of $10,000 per request, per project, literally, plus an additional incremental fee of 25 cents per hectare, depending on the size of the project, up to a maximum of $150,000 per project, which have to be paid at the time of request. As it often happens, the project area might change at some point in time, and then we will be charging, we will be making an additional charge for those changes in allocation of activity data, as described there. Next slide, please. So the other set of updates that we have recently made a few days ago, we made a number of changes to the main documents of the jurisdictional and nested REDD framework, which we are now putting together into what is version 4.1. In essence, again, most of these changes come from the purpose of aligning closely the JNR framework with the core carbon principles of the ICBCM. But in addition, there have been a number of updates or amendments, literally, that we had identified and we wanted to include in this JNR framework. So we took the opportunity to put together some of those changes, those updates that we wanted to make, and also at the same time include those other changes that would more closely align the JNR framework with the core carbon principles. So we have made updates and changes to the three main documents of the JNR framework. First, to the non-permanence risk tool, to the JNR requirements for scenario 1, scenario 2, and scenario 3, and also for the JNR registration and issuance procedure. On the non-permanence risk tool, the main change that we are making is that now non-permanence risk has to be assessed over a 100-year horizon for each program. Programs have to be at least 40 years long, and also we are including the program longevity as a sixth factor to be assessed in the assessment of non-permanence of the program. In the JNR requirements, in all the three scenarios, we are making two main changes in order to make them to make the JNR framework fully consistent and aligned with VM48. On the one hand, we are requiring the risk mapping and allocation of FRELs to projects within the program, within a jurisdictional program, to be carried out using VT7 as the same tool that we are using for VM48. And also, we are requiring that jurisdictional activity data are estimated using the sample-based estimation method, the same as in VMD55. Then, in addition, in scenarios 2 and 3, we are also including a requirement for the jurisdictional proponent to demonstrate that the revenue from carbon credits is decisive for actually implementing the jurisdictional program as described in the program description. And also, we are limiting the time between the program start date and the completion of validation and registration, which was in the previous version was left open-ended, and now we are limiting this time period to no more than 6 years. And also, we are requiring that all the jurisdiction has to be monitored over the course of the program life, and not those areas that presumably were not impacted by the program activities should also be monitored. Next slide, please. In the registration and issuance process, we are making also a few changes, basically in relation to the management of how the carbon credits that are deposited in the pool buffer are handled. Basically, those credits cannot be released even if the program performs very well, and also programs that withdraw from the VCS program have to be immediately cancelled. And also, we are updating and simplifying the different statuses that under which each program is listed in our registry. Now, you can find the new version of these documents in our website. And something that is important to notice is that these changes are effective immediately for new programs, but those that are already listed in our registry as under development or under validation will be mandatory for them to adopt these changes upon FREL reassessment. However, it might be in the program's own interest to adopt these changes earlier than that, because hopefully this JNR framework might be approved by the ICBCM, and then that would ensure their alignment with the ICBCM's CCPs. Next slide. I think I will pass this over to Naomi. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Salvador. Super useful update. So there are other bits and pieces that we have talked about before that are still also under development. So I just wanted to give a brief update on those. So as many of you know, we are also working on a new module for avoided planned deforestation projects. So those are underway now. The development of the initial draft module is underway. And we are hoping that we will have a draft early in 2025 for public consultation, and we'll be working on that throughout next year, and it'll be available later in 2025. We are also working on updates around avoided unplanned degradation, and we'll also be diving into those in 2025. The exact timing of releases is being scoped at this point, so we will have more information and let people know more information about that in due course. We are also working on another update to JNR. So the update that we have done now is really focused predominantly on the ICBCM alignment, as well as some other just small edits that have been caught over the years that needed to be made. Whereas we'll be taking a more deep look at that and the long-term strategy for JNR and making other updates to that also in 2025. That will include incorporating the updates that we're making under VM48 into JNR. So bringing in the new requirements around planned deforestation, and unplanned degradation, as well as potentially updates around enhancements. And we're still looking into whether it will make sense to allow trends for jurisdictional level deforestation. So many of you may be aware that, under art trees, for example, there's an HFLD adjustment. We had always intended to look at whether an increasing or decreasing trend, could be better accommodated and how that can be done. So it's something that we'll be digging further into in terms of the potential and what that might look like in the JNR framework. So those are all forthcoming updates that are either underway now already or will be soon and for target dates next year. So with that, we will turn it over to you. Again, a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A box and we will take those one by one. We have about 15 minutes for questions before we need to drop off. So happy to answer what we've got. Andrew, do you want to help take us through?
Great. Yeah. Happy to do a bit of moderation. So, Salvador, I think this one's for you, but Larissa asks, how is the forest management activity being included within the project level baseline scenario?
There are two situations in there that are already accounted for. In some cases, these activities are not part of the baseline scenario. The project area doesn't include that sort of activities, and they will be basically just accounted for in the project emissions, emissions from the project scenario. In those other cases where they are already part of the baseline scenario, the carbon accounting already takes them into account. The carbon accounting procedure already takes them into account.
Great. Thank you. And I'll toss this one up for whoever wants to answer it. But Ethan asks, how will projects that are currently validated or that will be validated before the requirement to transition to VM48 that have deforestation and degradation using VM6 be treated? I think this probably makes sense for Naomi. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So yes, at the moment, one of the things that's specified in the transition guidance, if you read the transition page on the website, if you have trouble accessing that, just shoot us an email at forestcarbon@verra.org. But as is outlined there, for activities that are not included in the methodology in existing projects, then you can continue using the original methodology for those activities. But as we also said, we will be making updates on degradation. So for now, you can keep using the older methodology until we have new rules or methods that will replace that.
Yes, on that one, if I may, something that is important to consider now that there will be two methodologies coexisting is to keep the two activity areas spatially distinct, clearly spatially distinct, those areas where degradation is being avoided from those areas where deforestation is being avoided, so that there is no chance for double counting. But hopefully we'll come up with some more integral solution within VM48.
Yeah, updates will be coming on that for sure.
Great. And I have a question here that I will actually take, another one from Anna, which asks, is it possible for a project developer to calculate its own jurisdictional activity data and deforestation risk maps following VMD55 instructions, and for that to be validated by Verra for allocation on a certain project area? Unfortunately, no, this is not currently allowed for given our conflict of interest rules. However, we do, and we've tried to give as many opportunities as possible for all stakeholders, including project developers, to submit any relevant data that could be used by our data service providers to help improve the quality of their activity data estimates and their risk maps. So this includes project level forest cover benchmark maps, any sort of sampling that might be available, and then drivers of deforestation that might be relevant to the jurisdiction, particular layers that have been found to be useful. But for the actual modeling and estimation, that's something that just to centralize data production, we've opted to do it ourselves or through our contractors. So unfortunately, that is not allowed for at this time.
Yeah, I might just add one thing, which is that if we allowed individual projects to do that, then the result would be multiple different versions in a jurisdiction potentially, which obviously would create a bunch of conflicts. And so one of the main reasons that we centralize this beyond the removing of conflict of interest, it's also, or the potential for that, is really to make sure that there's one system for each country, at least in terms of what's being used for the allocation of data under the VCS.
Great. I think I have one more pretty specific question we can go through, and I don't know if we might need to get back to the individual on this one, but for above and below ground biomass stock estimates, can secondary data be used or only direct field measurements from forest inventories? Salvador, do you know that one off the top of your head?
Yes, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by secondary data. The way that those emission factors, carbon stocks, and all that have to be calculated, and the guidelines for using different data sources are described in the modules that are referred to in VMD55. Nowadays, yes, the primary source is actual data collected directly in the field, and we provide guidance on the number of samples and all that stuff. There are provisions for some in those cases where that's where there are already data already published for the same region in the same area that can be used, and so on. There are a number of guidance on that, and even in some cases, default data or factors published by IPCC or some other similar sources can be used under several circumstances. But basically, we are following what the modules referred to in VMD55 described in there. Now, if you are talking about this new information that is being produced by some with new technologies, combining different remote sensing data and in-depth, very sophisticated technological analytical tools that claim to estimate directly above ground biomass or even carbon contents and all that. No, we are not yet including that. We have been looking at, Andrew has been looking at those that sort of information, and we believe that no, we are convinced that at present time the uncertainty of those estimates is too high for their being used at the project level.
Great, excellent answer, Salvador. And actually, they asked a few clarifying or gave some clarifying information that you covered in your response without seeing it. So thank you for that. Interesting question we have here is can a project developer or can a project description be submitted under development in a country where the jurisdictional baseline was not released yet? I believe so. I don't think there's any restrictions against that. And we have some projects listed as under development for VM48, but we have not released any of that data yet. So yeah, I don't believe there's any issues there.
Yeah, I would just add that there's two options. So at the moment, you're not required to use VM48 until the data is available. So you have the option of either moving forward at the moment under the old methodologies or going ahead with listing under VM48, and then you just won't be able to move to the next step of validation until the data is available. So those are the two options available right now, but either one of them works.
Great, and I'm getting a few very specific questions on calculations of the PATA fee. So basically the way that I'm not going to answer each of the individual ones, but broad strokes here is you will submit a project, your project area, and per VMD55, Verra is now responsible for designing or for delivering the leakage belt, and that's just basically a buffer around your project area, and then we will share that. And so the pricing, yes, will be based off of the combined size of the project area and the leakage belt that we develop. So, and like we said, that all those rules apply, and it caps at 150,000 and all of those things. So yes, and any follow-ons with that, I'd be happy to answer any specific questions in an email, but unfortunately, I've got a few questions that are basically the same, and I'll please just consider this my blanket response. And if you have any other questions, reach out to me directly.
Another
we
question
don't have.
just one other question on that in terms of the fee, because we've gotten this in a couple other forums, is that limitation around 20% change. So that doesn't limit, like, if your project for whatever reason, you know, for example, in terms of engagement with communities or establishing the rights between the submission and the ultimate registration has changed its shape or size, you can re-request the data and we're not charging the whole fee. But if it's more than 20%, then you just pay the full fee. It's not a limitation on the actual amount of change. It's just a limitation on how you can get the reduced fee if there has been a shift between those 2 points in time, so that we have the final data official version from us for the full area and the full final area of the project at registration.
Yes, thank you for that. And I would also note that this isn't just you know, like, you're going to get blindsided. You will be given the size and the cost and everything in advance of actually receiving an invoice of that. So there's going to be no surprises here. Okay, well, we don't have any other questions. Oh, sorry, one more.
No, I was going to go in the same direction. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, no, yeah, go for it.
A last chance, last call for questions. Otherwise, we will go ahead and wrap it up here. And again, you can always reach out to us at forestcarbon@verra.org, and we will be happy to answer you one-on-one. Thank you again for coming today, and hopefully this has been useful. Have a good afternoon, evening, rest of your morning, wherever you are. Thank you. Bye-bye.